A6 March, 1945, Cologne, Domkloster Street. A German tankman, Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Bartelbach, sits in the turret of his Panther and watches the American column through the periscope. He had seen hundreds of Shermans and knew their weak points well. The 75mm M3 gun could not penetrate the Panther's glacis even from 200 meters. But this time, something is different. From around the corner crawls another machine, taller, heavier, with a longer barrel. Bartelbach only manages to shout to the driver, "Enemy!" when an American round slams into the frontal plate at roughly 853 meters per second. The 90mm armor-piercing M82 punches through the Panther's 80mm sloped plate and exits. The crew does not even have time to finish traversing the turret. It was one of the first publicly documented engagements of the M26 Pershing against German heavy tanks. And the moment the Germans realized the rules had changed. By February 1945, the US Army in Europe was fighting almost exclusively with the M4 Sherman. Light, numerous, reliable, but helpless against Tigers and Panthers. The numbers are merciless. In the summer of 1944 in Normandy, on average one Tiger knocked out 5 Shermans before being disabled. A Panther accounted for 3 to 4. Tankers knew that meeting a heavy German tank often meant the death of the first, sometimes the second, and even the third crew. The Pentagon recognized the problem as early as 1942 and launched the T-26 heavy tank program. But bureaucracy, logistics, and General Leslie McNair's conservatism stalled the project for years. The first production, M26, rolled off the Fisher Tank Arsenal line in Detroit only in November 1944. In January 1945, the first 20 vehicles reached Europe, at the war's final stage, when the Wehrmacht was already retreating, yet still fielded hundreds of Tigers and Panthers. This is the story of a tank that arrived almost too late, but still managed to shift the balance, of engineers who for 3 years battered the wall of institutional inertia, of crews who, for the first time, felt their machine was not prey, but a predator, and of Germans who suddenly grasped that superiority in armor and firepower was no longer theirs. Spring of 1943, North Africa. Near the Fide Pass in Tunisia, elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division meet Tigers AOSF, E for the first time. The result is disastrous. 75mm M61 rounds ricochet off the Tiger's 100mm glacis, leaving only dents. Meanwhile, the 88mm KWK-36 knocks out Shermans from 1,500 to 2,000 meters, long before the Americans can reach accurate fire range. Over 2 days of fighting, the Americans lose 44 M4 A1 tanks. The Germans lose only 2 Tigers, and those to mechanical failures. Colonel Philip Stark, commander of the 13th Tank Regiment, reports, "Our crews feel like infantry with rifles against machine gun nests. The only chance is to flank and hit side or rear, but that costs 2 or 3 tanks." The hardware speaks for itself. The M4 Sherman weighs about 30 tons. Its glacis is 51mm, set at 56 degrees, giving an equivalent of roughly 90mm. Sounds respectable, but the German subcaliber Pijger 40 can pierce around 140mm at 1 kilometer. The Tiger weighs 54 tons, with 100mm vertical front armor and 80mm sides. The 88mm KWK 36L/56 delivers a muzzle energy of about 240,000 joules, versus roughly 113,000 for the Sherman's 75mm M3. Numbers do not lie. The M4 was designed to support infantry and fight the light German tanks of 1941. By 1943, Tigers and Panthers were arriving en masse. General Jacob Devers, commander of armored forces in Europe, sent a priority cable to Washington on 15 June 1943. "We need a heavy tank with a 90mm gun, immediately. Every month of delay costs lives." The problem was that the required machine already existed, on paper. The T-26E1 had been designed back in 1942, but the project bogged down in Washington's offices. A chain of approvals, transport limits, and the priority of mass-producing Shermans kept pushing the decisive step back, while the battlefield tally grew to hundreds of burned-out tanks and dead crews. 1942. Detroit, Michigan, the Fisher Body Division Design Bureau of General Motors. A team of engineers receives an order from the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. Create a heavy tank to defeat Germany's new generation machines. The requirements are strict. Frontal armor of no less than 100 millimeters, a 90 millimeter gun, and a mass up to 40 tons, so the tank would not break bridges and would remain compatible with transport ships. The engineers understand the tightrope. More armor means more weight means less speed, and greater strain on the transmission. And a 90 millimeter gun demands a heavier turret with counterweights and stronger drives. The first prototype, T-26E1, is assembled in May 1943. Weight, about 41.7 tons, nearly 10 more than the Sherman. Engine, the Ford GAF V8, as on the M4, but tuned to roughly 500 horsepower. Armament, the experimental 90 millimeter T7, L/53, about 4.77 meters, derived from the M1 anti-aircraft family. With the armored piercing-capped M82, it confidently defeats heavy armor at medium ranges. The practical takeaway? The M26 can punch a Tiger's front from noticeably farther away than a 75mm M3 on a Sherman, and it can pierce a Panther's side from a kilometer and beyond. But another obstacle appears. General Leslie McNair, commander of the U.S. Army Ground Forces, insists the Army does not need heavy tanks. His doctrine, tanks support infantry, enemy tanks are the job of aircraft and anti-tank guns. At a meeting on 12 August 1943, McNair snaps, "T-26 is wasteful. We're already producing 2,000 Shermans per month. Why disrupt production if the M4 does the job?" Colonel Barnes tries to object. "Sir, our North Africa experience shows..." McNair cuts him off. "The issue is tactics. Give crews more M4s and teach them to flank." The project is put on pause. In the autumn of 1943, the situation shifts. Intelligence reports that Germany is ramping up Panther AOSF, a production, a 45-ton vehicle with the KWK-42 L/70, whose penetration at range surpasses the Tigers. On 20 December 1943, General Dwight Eisenhower, commander of Allied forces in Europe, calls Washington, "I need T-26 yesterday." The program is thawed. February 1944, Aberdeen, Proving Ground, Maryland. The T-26E1 goes to trials. The hull is shot with captured German guns. An 88mm PZ-39 from 1 kilometer fails to penetrate the glacis, only a deep crater. For the first time, the Americans have a tank that can take a Tiger punch. But the machine presents the bill. The transmission buckles under weight. Within the first 200 kilometers, the final drive fails. The suspension cracks on rough ground. Turret traverse is sluggish. The electric drive struggles with the mass. The designers rework components through the night. Gear teeth are reinforced. Torsion bars are redesigned. An improved gun stabilizer is installed, based on the Sherman system, but adapted to the heavier turret. By May 1944, the T-26E3 production configuration is ready. Even so, General McNair blocks mass production. 1 month to the Normandy landings. "We cannot change the fleet now. Logistics won't bear it." He is partly right. Thousands of Shermans are already on transports. Crews are trained on the M4. Depots are packed with M4 spares. Introducing a new tank would mean massive disruption. But Normandy proves different. July 1944, Operation Cobra. During the breakout, U.S. divisions slam into defenses hosting heavy SS battalions, Tigers and Panthers. In 3 days, the U.S. 2nd Armored Division loses 67 Shermans. The Germans lose 11 tanks, mostly to air attack or breakdowns. Tankers ride home. Sergeant James Bates of Ohio puts it bluntly, "We ride in mobile coffins." When you see a Tiger, you pray it doesn't see you first. On 9 August 1944, McNair is killed in an airstrike, a bitter irony for an advocate of air power first. The road opens for the T-26. In September 1944, the new commander, General Ben Lear, signs an order for 1,000 T-26E3s, official designation M26. Fisher Tank Arsenal and Detroit Tank Arsenal retool their lines. On 17 November 1944, the first production M26 rolls off. Someone chalks on the turret, "At last." January 1945, Belgium, the port of Antwerp. From the Liberty ship SS John Ericsson, the first 20 M26 tanks are unloaded. This is Zebra mission, an urgent combat trial of the new machine. The tanks are split between the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions. Crew training is compressed to 3 days instead of the usual 2 weeks. Instructor Captain John Grinnell explains, "Forget everything about the Sherman. The Pershing is heavier and slower, but its armor shrugs off what made the M4 light up." Driver mechanic Lieutenant Bob Early notes in his journal, "Inside an M26, you feel different. Thicker walls, hits sound dull. For the first time in 2 years, I'm not afraid of every single shot." 6 March 1945, Cologne, Domkloster Street, a Panther AUSF. G under Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Bartelbach takes position at an intersection, tasked with halting the American push toward the city center. The crew has 9 Shermans to its credit since the start of the year. The plan is simple: let the column close, smash the lead tank, block the street, then methodically pick off the rest. But the M26 at the head of the column does not behave like an M4. It does not try to dash through under fire. It stops, settles the sight, and fires first. A 90mm armor-piercing M82, weighing about 10.9 kilograms, leaves the muzzle at roughly 853 meters per second, range about 240 meters. The shot comes in at roughly 30 degrees. The 80mm sloped glacis of the Panther fails. The round passes clean through, ruptures the fuel tanks, and ignites the ammunition. Explosion. The Panther's crew does not survive. The M26's gunner, Sergeant Clarence Smoyer, says calmly over the intercom, "Hit." Explosion. For the first time, he has dropped a heavy German tank with the first round. The commander, Lieutenant Robert Early, keeps it short. Forward, carefully. March 1945. Maintenance depot of the 3rd Armored Division, Rheinberg, Germany. Engineer Captain William Horstmann examines a knocked-out Tiger II, the Wehrmacht's newest heavy tank. In the frontal plate is a clean penetration hole about 90 millimeters across. Measurements show 150 millimeters at 50 degrees at the impact point, an equivalent of roughly 230 millimeters of vertical armor. The round went straight through. Horstmann's report notes, APC M82 penetrates the Koenigsteiger's frontal armor from approximately 400 meters. This changes the calculus. M26. Pershing specifications. Mass, about 41.7 tons. Engine Ford, GAF V8 at about 500 horsepower. Speed, up to 40 kilometers per hour on road, and 15 to 20 kilometers per hour cross-country. Armor, hull nose 102 millimeters at 46 degrees, side 76 millimeters vertical, turret front about 101 millimeters, rounded sector yielding an effective about 150 to 180 millimeters against ogival armor piercing and subcaliber rounds. Armament, 90 millimeter gun, M3L/53. Ammunition stowage, about 70 rounds. Natures, M82 APC, 10.9 kilograms, about 853 meters per second. M71 high explosive, M304 HV AP, experimental subcaliber, about 1,143 meters per second. Approximate penetration for M82, about 170 millimeters at 500 meters and 30 degrees, about 155 millimeters at 1,000 meters, about 140 millimeters at 1,500 meters. For comparison, Tiger I, AOSF-E, 54 tons. Frontal armor, 100 millimeters vertical. Gun, 88 millimeter KWK-36. Penetration about 140 millimeters at 1,000 meters. Panther, OASF-G, 45 tons. Glacis 80 millimeters at 55 degrees. Effective roughly 140 millimeters. Gun 75mm KWK-42. Penetration about 174 millimeters at 1,000 meters. Tiger II, 68 tons. Glaucis 150 millimeters at 50 degrees. Gun 88mm KWK-43L/71. Penetration about 200 plus millimeters at 1,000 meters. On paper, the Tiger II is stronger, more powerful gun, thicker armor. Reality differs. By March 1945, only about 489 had been produced. Many are stranded for lack of fuel. The Maybach OG 4012-16. B transmission is temperamental, with limited service life and failures after only hundreds of kilometers. The Maybach HL 230P30 engine drinks fuel by the bucket. Cross-country consumption runs to hundreds of liters per 100 kilometers. And fuel in the Reich is scarce. Romanian fields are gone. Synthetic plants lie under B-17 bombs. The M26 fields, a hydrodynamic torquematic transmission with automatic control, far steadier longevity, up to several thousand kilometers between major overhauls, and markedly lower specific consumption, around about 250 liters per 100 kilometers in combat conditions. The key edge, though, is reliable fuel logistics. Lieutenant Early admits to his driver, "I used to fear the Tiger. Now, only Panzerfaust ambushes. Armor won't save you from that." The infantry Panzerfaust is indeed the chief urban threat. A shaped charge that pierces about 200 millimeters or more, but with an effective reach of up to 60 meters. You must let the tank come almost point blank. The Americans answer with tactics. Infantry telephones on tank rears, slow urban movement under infantry cover. In March, order the Pershings lead, the Shermans follow. 6 March 1945. Elsdorf, about 20 kilometers from Cologne. Company E of the 32nd Tank Regiment moves through narrow streets. Up front, 3 M26 tanks under Captain John McKenna. Behind, 5 M4A3. Recon reports 2 Panthers and 1 Tiger I dug in near St. Martin's Church. McKenna's plan is to flank and strike from the side. But as the lead M26 noses past a corner, the Tiger is already waiting, hull down, behind rubble, only the turret visible, about 380 meters. The Germans fire first. An 88mm round slams into the glacis of Lieutenant Frank Odom's M26. The blow deafens the crew, but the plate holds. Deep crater, no penetration. "Hit! I'm alive!" The driver, Private Davis, shouts into the intercom. Odom's gunner, Sergeant McBride, already has the sight on. Crosshairs settle on the Tiger's silhouette. 380 meters, negligible crosswind, shot. The M82 APC flies for about 0.44 seconds and strikes the right sector of the turret, at the turret ring joint, where thickness is about 82 millimeters. Penetration, hit on the ammunition stowage, detonation. The turret lifts off the race. The second M26, Lieutenant Bob Hamels, lands a side hit on a Panther at about 420 meters. Fire erupts. The third Panther tries to back out but bogs down. The crew abandons the vehicle. 4 minutes, and the fight is over. The Americans lose not a single tank. The captain inspects the dent on Odom's machine, about 40 millimeters deep. "Lucky," he sighs. "It's not luck, sir. It's engineering," Odom answers evenly. In a letter to his wife in Illinois, he will write, "Today, for the first time, I didn't think I would die. A Tiger hit us in the nose, and I stayed in the fight." The Germans report as well. Oberleutnant Kurt Knirsch, 506th Heavy Battalion. The new American tank has firepower comparable to our 88 and armor that holds at medium ranges. The 2-year advantage is gone. At Army Group B headquarters, Field Marshal Walter Model says dryly to his aide, "The Americans have finally learned to build tanks. Too late, for them and for us." 23, March 1945. Operation Plunder, crossing near Wesel. At the front are about 40 M26 tanks divided between the 1st and 9th Armored Divisions. The mission, break the defenses on the east bank and expand the bridgehead. Here the Rhine is about 400 meters wide, with a current of about 2.5 meters per second. The bridges are blown. Only pontoons remain under heavy fire. Engineers lay an M2 treadway, steel tread sections on floating pontoons, carrying capacity about 45 tons. An M26 weighs about 41.7 tons. It's the limit, but within tolerance. At 0630, Lieutenant Charles Kelly's lead tank rolls onto the bridge. The pontoons settle deep but hold. Speed, about 5 kilometers per hour. Behind come the 2nd, 3rd, 4th. German Lee FH-18 howitzers range the span. One section slips under. Neighboring bays take the load. Kelly reaches the east bank, swings the turret, and hammers strong points with M71 high explosive, 10.6 kilograms, about 680 grams of explosive in each. By 0900, all 7 Pershings are across. Shermans, half-tracks, and supply trucks rumble after them. Counterattack. From the tree line emerge Stug 3 AUSF. G at about 800 meters. Their Stu K-40 guns open on American positions. One round punches through the side of Lieutenant Thomas Howell's M26. The tank erupts. The crew bails out, but the loader, Private Miller, does not make it. This is the first confirmed M26 loss to enemy fire. The other Pershings answer back. In about 12 minutes, 4 Stu Gs are knocked out. The rest fall away. By evening, the bridgehead is about 3 kilometers wide. Counterattacks repelled, the road east open. Sergeant Kelly writes, "Today we brought a heavy tank across the Rhine. Once, Caesar did the same. He had elephants. We have the Pershing. He would have taken a picture." 26, March 1945. Paderborn, East Westphalia. A rail hub and heavy tank training ground. The 507th Battalion with Tiger II tanks is based here. Intelligence is imprecise. Aerial photos show at least 3 dozen vehicles, some inside hangars. The 9th Armored Division receives orders to bypass the city from the south and cut the highway to Kassel. In the vanguard is Company A of the 2nd Tank Battalion with 6 M26 in line. At 1420, the column emerges from the woods onto open fields before the outskirts. On the ridge, a Tiger II, about 1,200 meters. The Germans fire first, a Pisager. 39/43, at about 1,000 meters per second, hits the upper glacis of the lead M26, Lieutenant Richard Baker's tank. The weak spot, about 76 millimeters. The round passes through the fighting compartment, mortally wounding the gunner and loader, and exits through the rear. The tank does not detonate but is rendered combat ineffective. The 2nd M26, Captain William McChesney's, halts and takes aim at about 1,180 meters. An M82 shot. At that range, the trajectory drops almost 2 meters, so he holds high. Impact on the Tiger II's turret face, about 185 millimeters, rounded section. A ricochet, leaving a dent. The Tiger fires again, miss, the shell landing 15 meters away. "Forward, closer," McChesney says curtly. The M26 accelerates to about 40 kilometers per hour. The Germans need 7 to 8 seconds to reload. The 3rd shot misses again. The 4th strikes the M26's nose, but does not penetrate. At about 820 meters, McChesney's 2nd round targets the turret to hull joint, where thickness is about 100 millimeters. Penetration. Fire. The Tiger II's crew bails out. All 5 are alive, one with a leg wound. American infantry takes them prisoner. The German commander, SS Untersturmführer Hans Fenrich, mutters through an interpreter, "Your tank is good, ours is better. We lost because of the distance." McChesney answers evenly. Distance is part of the fight too. April 1945. Headquarters of the 1st U.S. Army, Marburg, Germany. Colonel James Trushell, head of the Combat Loss Analysis Section, sums up the M26 Pershing's effectiveness. On his desk, reports from the 3rd, 9th, and 1st Armored Divisions. The figures upend expectations. In 2 months of fighting in Germany, M26 tanks took part in 27 tank-on-tank duels with German heavy machines. The breakdown, against Tiger 1, 8 encounters, 7 Tigers destroyed, 1 M26 lost, side penetration at close range. Against Panther, 14 encounters, 12 Panthers destroyed, 2 M26 lost, 1 to a mine, 1 to a Panzerfaust. Against Tiger II, 5 encounters, 3 King Tigers destroyed, 1 M26 lost, upper glacis penetration from about 1,100 meters. Total, 22 German heavy tanks destroyed versus 4 M26 lost. Loss ratio, about 5.5 to 1 in favor of the Americans. By comparison, the M4 Sherman in clashes with Tigers and Panthers showed the reverse, about 1 to 3.6. For each heavy German tank knocked out, the Americans lost nearly 4 Shermans. The Pershing markedly shifted the balance. Still, Truschel notes weaknesses. His report states low cross-country mobility. Even with about 660mm tracks, spring mud still sucks the ground. Where the M4 can sometimes squeeze through, the M26 may bog down. Slower road movement, maximum about 40 kilometers per hour versus about 48 kilometers per hour for the Sherman. M26 columns fall behind. Mechanical reliability needs work. Of 40 vehicles sent to Europe, 6 suffered transmission failures before their first battle. 8 more required repairs after about 300 to 500 kilometers of operation. More complex maintenance. An engine swap takes about 12 hours, the M4 about 6 hours. Even so, the final conclusion is unambiguous. The M26 is the first American tank capable of meeting German heavies on equal terms. Mass production is recommended. The problem is timing. The war in Europe is winding down. As of April 1945, frontline units have only 53 M26. Another about 257 are at sea or in depots in France. Meanwhile, German industry is effectively halted. The Henschel plant in Kassel, where Tigers were assembled, was seized on 3 April. MAN's Nuremberg works that built Panthers were shattered by bombing. Few new German tanks arrive. Those at the front often simply lack fuel. Lieutenant Bob Early, who drove an M26 from Cologne to the Ruhr, puts it plainly. We got the best tank of the war at the moment the Germans had already lost. Irony. But there is another theater where the Pershing could have changed the rules. Only 1945, the Pentagon, Washington. General Douglas MacArthur studies the reports from Okinawa. Japanese resistance is desperate. Allied losses are heavy. Japanese tanks themselves, the light type 97, Chiha with 47mm guns, are not a decisive threat, but another trial looms. Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands slated for November. Intelligence reports. The home islands are preparing for defense. Permanent fortifications, tanks dug in at static strong points, millions of civilians readied for partisan-style action. Analysts forecast that landings on Kyushu and Honshu could cost hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million casualties. In this context, the M26 appears less a Tiger hunter and more an assault tank. Its 90mm gun breaks concrete bunkers. Its thick armor resists Japanese 47mm Type 1 anti-tank fire far better than the M4. On 16 May 1945, MacArthur sends a request to the War Department. Please dispatch 300 M26 tanks to depots in the Philippines to prepare for Operation Olympic. Urgent. The request is approved. By July, the first 12 M26 arrive on Luzon. Crews begin training in tropical conditions. New challenges surface. The Ford GAF overheats at plus 35 degrees Celsius and about 90% humidity. Tracks rust quickly in salty air. Periscope optics fog. Engineers respond with additional louvers on the engine deck, anti-corrosion coating for the tracks, and improved fighting compartment ventilation. By August 1945, there are about 47 M26 in the Philippines, ready for action. But on 6 August, the B-29 Enola Gay drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On 9 August, a second bomb falls on Nagasaki. On 15 August, Japan announces surrender. Downfall is canceled. The Pershings in the Philippines become unnecessary. They are mothballed in depots. Lieutenant John Smith, a platoon leader slated for Kyushu, writes home, "They told us the invasion would be hell, and half of us wouldn't return. The war ended, and I never fired this tank." A strange mix of relief and disappointment. September 1945. Fisher Tank Arsenal, Detroit. production of the M26 stops. A total of 2,212 tanks are built. Of these, only 53 actually see combat in Europe. None in the Pacific. The rest sit in depots in the United States, France, and the Philippines. The Army shrinks from 8 million to 2 million, and it seems tanks are no longer needed. Some are slated for the smelter. 5 years pass, and everything changes. On 25 June 1950, North Korea invades the South. The KPA fields about 240 Soviet T-3485, one of the most successful medium tanks of the Second World War. U.S. forces in Korea have mostly light M24 Chaffee with 75mm guns, and the T-34s knock them out with impunity. M26 tanks are rushed from depots in Japan and the Philippines. By August 1950, there are already about 138 Pershings in Korea. They prove convincing again. The 90mm gun reliably penetrates the T-3485 at any realistic range, and the M26's frontal armor often stops 85mm hits. The first tank battle of the Korean War, 17 August 1950 near Daegu. A platoon of M26 under Lieutenant Carter meets 5 T-3485. In 15 minutes, all 5 are destroyed. The Americans take no losses. But familiar flaws resurface in Korea. Modest mobility, a finicky transmission, engine overheating. By 1951, they begin replacing Pershings with modernized M46 Patton, featuring the Continental AV1790 engine, about 810 horsepower, and C-850 transmission. In essence, it is a deeply reworked M26, faster and more reliable. From it, the entire Patton line will descend, serving the U.S. Army into the 1990s. Original M26 tanks are withdrawn from combat units by 1953. Some go to allies, Belgium, France, Italy. Others are converted into engineer vehicles, bridge layers, and recovery tanks. The last M26 are retired in 1959. Today you can see them in museums, at Fort Knox, Kentucky, at the Bovington Tank Museum, United Kingdom, and at Kubinka, Russia, a trophy vehicle captured by North Koreans and handed to the USSR for study. On the glacis of one tank at Fort Knox, a deep dent is still visible, 88mm in diameter, 38mm deep. The shot did not penetrate. The plaque reads, M26 Pershing, Cologne, February 1945. Crew of Lieutenant Robert Early. Withstood a duel with a Panther at 240 meters. Clarification: the well-known Cologne action occurred on 6 March 1945. Museum captions sometimes differ from archival records, but that does not diminish the story of this particular machine. June 2003. Veterans Home, Springfield, Illinois. An 88-year-old Bob Early sits in an armchair, studying a yellowed black and white photograph. A young lieutenant stands by a tank, a white star on the turret, and the name Eagle 7. "This is my Pershing," Early says. "I drove it from the Rhine to the Elbe, 5 months. Feels like a lifetime." He speaks slowly, with long pauses. An old man's memory falters, yet some details surface sharply, as if they happened moments ago. The worst part isn't the shots. You get used to those. The worst is the waiting. You stand at a crossroads and don't know if there's a German tank around the corner. You hear tracks, but you can't see who's coming. You aim and understand. If you miss, the next shot is coming for you. He recalls Cologne, the first Panther he knocked out, and the dent on the glasses from an 88mm shell. I thought then, the engineers who designed this armor saved my life. I never saw them, don't know their names, but they did their job flawlessly. Because of them, I'm here, talking to you. Early lived to 92 and died in 2007. 3 of his comrades from the Eagle 7 crew came to the funeral: gunner Clarence Smoyer, driver Davis, radio operator McDonald. Loader Johnson was killed in Korea in 1951 in another tank. Early was buried with military honors. His headstone reads, Robert Early, Lieutenant, 32nd Tank Regiment, M26 Pershing, Cologne, Elbe, 1945. Captain, later. Clarence Smoyer, the same gunner who hit the Panther in Cologne, lived to 99 and died in 2019. He gave his last interview in 2018, at 98. Asked, "What did you feel when you fired at a German tank?" He answered simply, "Concentration. Only concentration. The crosshair, the range, the wind correction, the shot. Emotions come afterward. Fear, relief, fatigue. In the moment of the shot, it's just work." And what do you think of the M26 now, 7 decades later? It was a good tank, not perfect. Slow, sometimes temperamental. But under fire, that's not what matters. What matters is whether the armor holds and whether your gun bites. With the M26, the answer to both was yes. Would you have wanted it to arrive earlier? Smoyer fell silent for a minute, then said, "I lost many friends in Shermans, boys of 20, 22. They didn't live to see the war end, didn't marry, didn't have children. If the M26 had arrived in 1943, in Italy, in Normandy, how many of them would have survived? Hundreds? Thousands? I don't know. I know this. Too many died because someone in Washington decided to wait." April 1943. A hypothetical scenario. Imagine General McNair does not block the T-26 program. The first production M26 reached the troops not in January 1945, but in May 1943, before the Sicily landings. How would the war have changed? Historians have debated this since the 1950s. One school says the outcome wouldn't flip. Germany would still lose due to collapsing resources, oil, manufacturing, and demographics. The other replies, perhaps, but how many lives would have been saved? Let's look at the facts. Italian campaign, July 1943, May 1945. The Americans lose 2,641. M4, Sherman tanks of various marks. The primary causes are ground roll use of 88mm flak 36 and the appearance of tigers. In Italy's mountains, maneuver is restricted. Fights often collapse to 300 to 600 meters, exactly where the M26, with its armor and 90mm gun, would hold the strongest edge. An assessment by the United States Military Academy, 1989, models that if 1/3 of American tanks in Italy had been M26, losses would have dropped by about 38 to 42%. That's roughly 1,000 vehicles, and in each, 5 men, about 5,000 lives. Normandy, June, August 1944. Operation Cobra, near Mortain, 7 to 13 August. The Germans commit 2nd SS Das Reich and the 116th Panzer Division, about 75 Panthers and 35 Tigers. The Americans lose about 126 tanks in 6 days, the Germans about 89, but a large share to air and artillery rather than head-on duels. British historian John Buckley in Monty's Men, 2013, argues that with the M26, the Americans would have broken the armored groups faster, with fewer losses, and the breakout would have come 3 to 4 days earlier. The war's result wouldn't change, but its duration would shorten. Every day is a life. The Ardennes, December 1944, January 1945. The Wehrmacht's last major counterstroke, about 500 Panthers, 150 Tigers, 45 Tiger IIs. Around Bastogne, the 101st Airborne is encircled. A column of the 4th Armored fights through to relieve them and loses about 47 vehicles along 15 kilometers of road. Panthers ambush Shermans from the woods. With M26, the breakthrough likely comes faster. Fewer losses, fewer frostbitten infantry waiting for rescue. But all this is hypothesis. History doesn't do what if. The reality is simple. The M26 arrived at the curtain call. Too late to change the course, but in time to show what might have been. Why did it happen this way? Bureaucracy. The Ordnance Department, the General Staff, the Ground Forces Command, each layer added delays. One more discussion, one more test. Logistics. Thousands of Shermans were already on the lines. Retooling plants meant halting output for 3 to 4 months. Tanks were needed yesterday, not the day after tomorrow. Doctrinal conservatism. General McNair sincerely believed tanks are for infantry support, enemy tanks are for air power, and anti-tank artillery to handle. He wasn't wrong. He was the product of his school. No sense of urgency until 1944. The mass appearance of Tigers and Panthers on the Western Front came later. North Africa seemed peripheral. Italy secondary, while the true inferno raged in the east. Irony, the M26 was built to fight heavy German tanks of 1943 to 1945, but it actually fought when few of those tanks remained. It proved its real worth in Korea against the T-3485, machines of a different generation and a different design philosophy. The story of the M26 Pershing is a story about time, about how the right machine, born in the right country, can arrive a year or two or three too late. And those years are measured in lives. Technically, the M26 is a triumph of engineering, firepower, armor, and acceptable mobility. In real combat, it fought on equal terms with the best German tanks, and often won. The 90mm M3 gun could pierce the front of most opponents at combat ranges, and the 102mm sloped Glaupes held against teats that made the M4 ignite. For the first time, crews felt not like victims, but like hunters. And at the same time, it was slower, fussier to service, and heavy on logistics. Above all, it was late. Of 2,212 built, about 53 actually fought in Europe. Less than 3%. The rest never fired a shot at the enemy. What if the program had not been frozen in 1943? What if McNair had not slowed production? What if the first production vehicles had appeared in Sicily, or at least before Normandy? How many American tankers would have lived to see victory? We will not know for certain, but we do know this. Every knocked-out Sherman meant 5 men inside. On paper, history is numbers. In reality, it is burned skin and empty bunks. 2,641 Shermans lost in Italy. About 1,300 in France during the first 3 months after Normandy. About 730 in the Ardennes. That is thousands of crews, tens of thousands, killed, wounded, burned, concussed. The M26 would not have saved everyone. But it would have saved many. These lessons do not age. For engineers, build the best you can. Compromises in armor and safety are paid for with lives. For the military, listen to those who fight. Tankers from North Africa were asking for a heavy machine as early as 1943. They were told, the problem is tactics. For bureaucrats, every signature is time. And in war, time is counted not in minutes, but in people. There is also one central lesson for all of us. The M26 appeared almost too late, but it appeared. For 3 years, engineers pushed through committees and doubts, and proved they were right. Tankers who climbed into these vehicles said, "This was the best tank we fought in." For the first time, the odds felt even. Bob Early, who drove his Pershing from the Rhine to the Elbe, said at 90, "That tank saved my life. Because of it, I saw the end of the war, came home, married, raised children, lived a long life." How many of his friends never had that chance because they stayed in Shermans? Too many. The story of the M26 is not about changing the world's grand finale. It is about how almost too late became in time for some, and did not for others. A quiet reminder, in war there is no second take. There is only survival, and the moral duty not to be late. Today in the Fort Knox Museum, there stands a Pershing with a dent from an 88mm shell on its glacis. Tourists take photos. Children touch the cold steel. The guide tells the story. The shell did not penetrate. The crew lived. And somewhere in a parallel reality where the M26 arrived in 1943, a few thousand more survived. We do not live there. We live here. But we can remember and learn. So that if ever it comes to it again, we do not arrive late. December 1944. The Ardennes, -12 degrees. German Obersturmbannführer Kurt Meyer stood at the edge of the forest, staring at American positions. His armored group was preparing for a breakthrough. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last gamble. The goal, split the Allied line, seize Antwerp, and divide their forces. At 5 a.m., the first Panthers rolled forward. Behind them, 300 infantrymen. Meyer watched them advance confidently through the snow. Then, a sound. Deep, hollow, like hammer blows on an anvil. Boom, boom, boom. The first tank froze in place. The second erupted in flames. Tracers tore through the dawn, red lines thick as pencils. Infantry dropped row after row, as if mown down. Bullets shredded trees, smashed stones, turned cover to dust. After 15 minutes, the attack was over. Meyer couldn't understand. What was this? What weapon could erase a battalion in minutes? It was the M2 Browning, caliber 12.7 millimeters, a bullet weighing 42 grams, muzzle velocity 890 meters per second. Americans called it Ma Deuce. The Germans, Maschinenkanon, machine cannon. Because this wasn't a machine gun, it was a weapon that rewrote the rules of war. In 1933, when John Moses Browning finished developing his new heavy caliber system, almost no one in the U.S. War Department paid attention. The nation was at peace. The Army had only 140,000 men, fewer than Romania. Congress cut budgets and the new machine gun was accepted formally under the Index M2. Production moved slowly. By 1940, the Army had just 2,400 units. Then, in September 1939, the world changed. War had begun. President Roosevelt declared a course to make the United States the arsenal of democracy. Military spending soared from $1.5 to $89 billion within 4 years. The Colt plant in Hartford went to 24-hour production. Then Buffalo, Detroit, and Philadelphia followed. Output skyrocketed. 1941, 13,000 M2s. 1942, 48,000. 1943, 120,000. By the end of the war, over 400,000 units. The M2 became a universal weapon, mounted on jeeps, tanks, aircraft, and ships. The 50 BMG 12.7 by 99 mm round was designed to pierce armor. Its bullet weighed 5 times more than a rifle round, and its velocity of 890 meters per second carried 18,000 joules of energy, 5 times that of the German MG-42. Rate of fire, between 450 and 600 rounds per minute. Slower than the MG-42, but each shot from the M2 hit like a hammer. It could penetrate 25 millimeters of armor at half a kilometer, destroy concrete or wooden bunkers, and erase a man entirely. When the Allies landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, they already had over 12,000 of these guns. Each infantry battalion had 6, each Sherman tank 1, each transport vehicle 2. The M2 was everywhere, and the Germans felt it. But its true baptism came not in France, but earlier, in Tunisia, under the blazing North African sun. There, in 1943, Rommel's men first met the American Ma Deuce. That's where the legend began, a weapon that could stop a tank. February 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. A sandstorm turned the sky yellow. The U.S. 1st Infantry Regiment held positions on the slopes. Rookies, green, and inexperienced. Rommel knew it. The Desert Fox planned a lightning breakthrough. His 21st Panzer Division was to smash the Yanks, flank them, and close the trap. On the morning of February 19th, 20 Tigers and 40 Panzer IVs moved forward. Dust rose like a wall. Soldiers saw the silhouettes of tanks approaching. Hearts pounded. For many, their first real battle. Sergeant James Hendricks stood behind an M2 mounted on a tripod. Age 22, yesterday a farmer from Ohio, today a machine gunner. Next to him, an ammo box with a belt of 110 rounds. He remembered the instructor's words. Aim for the engine. Hit it. The tank's dead. The first Tiger closed to 800 meters. Hendricks squeezed the trigger. The M2's thud was unlike any other gun. Not a rattle, but a beat. Boom, boom, boom. Red tracers cut through the dust. The first rounds ricocheted off the frontal armor, but he kept firing. He raised the barrel toward the engine deck. Armor there, only 25 millimeters thick. A 15-shot burst. 2 bullets punched through. 1 into the radiator, 1 into the fuel tank. The tank jerked to a halt. Smoke billowed from the rear. Seconds later, flames. The crew bailed out, but Hendricks was already aiming at the infantry following behind. 12.7 millimeter rounds left no survivors. 1 took off a head. Another tore off an arm. A third blew a man apart. In 20 minutes of battle, 400 rounds. The barrel glowed red. His assistant poured water over it, steam rising up. But the M2 kept firing. By day's end, the Germans retreated. 8 tanks lay burning. The Americans held their ground. In his diary, Rommel wrote, "The Yanks have a new weapon, heavy machine guns of unusual power. Our tanks are vulnerable beyond 600 meters. We must change tactics. It was the first lesson. The Germans realized the Americans had brought something new to the war, something that could make even steel tigers tremble. The story of the M2 did not begin in 1933. It reaches much further back, to the post-war year of 1918, when the First World War was drawing to a close. At that time, the American Army used French Hotchkiss machine guns, heavy, unreliable, prone to overheating. The military wanted a better solution. John Moses Browning was born in 1855 in Ogden, Utah. The son of a gunsmith, he grew up in a workshop where every metallic sound shaped his thinking. At 13, he built his first rifle. At 20, he patented a shotgun. He was a designer by nature. By the beginning of the 20th century, Browning had designed more than 80 firearm models. His pistol, in 1911, entered legend. The automatic rifle bar served in 2 world wars. But the work on the large caliber, that which later became known as the M2, perhaps became his greatest legacy. In 1918, the War Department set a clear task: create a large caliber machine gun to engage aircraft and lightly armored targets. The choice fell on 1/2 inch, 12.7 millimeters. It was a compromise. A smaller caliber did not provide the required armor-piercing ability. A larger one made the system too bulky. Browning set to work in his workshop in Ogden. He worked day and night, drawing, calculating, assembling, and testing prototypes. He based his design on his earlier 1917 machine gun, 7.62 millimeters, and simply scaled the concept up, preserving the operating principle, a simple but reliable mechanism. The M2 used a short recoil barrel system. During the shot, the barrel and bolt recoiled together. After a few centimeters, a cam unlocked the bolt, which ejected the case and returned forward, picking up a new round from the belt. In that simplicity lay the secret of reliability. The first Browning prototype was shown in 1921 at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. The gun passed testing. 20,000 rounds without stoppages. The military were impressed, but funds for mass production were lacking. Over the next 12 years, Browning refined the design. He changed the feed system, lightened the barrel, improved the tripod. In 1930, shortly before his death, he completed the final version. On the 15th of June, 1933, the United States Army officially adopted it under the name Machine Gun Caliber 1/2 inch Browning M2. The technical specifications were striking. Length, 1,654 millimeters. Weight, 38 kilograms without the tripod. With the tripod, 58 kilograms. Barrel length, 1,143 millimeters. Grooves, 8, right-hand twist. Feed system, metal belt of 110 rounds. The 50 BMG Browning machine gun. Cartridge was created specifically for the M2. Case length, 99 millimeters. Overall cartridge length, 138 millimeters. Bullet weight, 42 grams. Powder charge, about 15 grams. The bullet was armor-piercing, a steel core jacketed in copper. The ballistics spoke for themselves. Muzzle velocity, 890 meters per second. At 500 meters, the bullet retained about 650 meters per second. Muzzle energy, approximately 18,000 joules, far exceeding rifle cartridge energy. Such a bullet could penetrate 25 millimeters of steel armor at 500 meters and easily destroy concrete and wooden fortifications. Effective range against personnel, up to 1,800 meters. Against aerial targets, up to 1,500 meters. Maximum range, about 6,800 meters. The bullet flew nearly 7 kilometers while retaining lethal kinetic energy. The reliability of the M2 became legendary. It functioned in a temperature range from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius and feared neither sand, dirt, nor moisture. Its austere construction with a minimal number of moving parts, only 75 components, meant fewer failures and more time in service. Browning died on the 26th of November, 1926, in Belgium, never seeing mass production of his child, but his creation outlived him. The M2 has been produced and used ever since. From 1930 onward, the model remained practically unchanged. more than 90 years of service as proof of the brilliance of the design. After Kasserine Pass, the Germans were forced to revise their tactics. Rommel ordered avoidance of frontal attacks against positions covered by the M2. Flanking maneuvers, night strikes, and softened artillery preparation became priorities. The Americans, meanwhile, improved their own methods. March 1943, Mareth Line, Tunisia. French fortifications from the 1930s, originally built against Italy, were now held by German and Italian forces. Montgomery's British Eighth Army prepared an offensive, and the American Second Corps covered the flank. Captain Robert Moore commanded a company of heavy machine guns. At his disposal were 12 M2s on tripods and 8 on half-track transporters. Moore had served since 1935. He knew the M2 thoroughly. Before battle, he briefed his men. Do not fire at the front. Aim at the sides, the rear, the tracks. Armor is weaker there. If you see an open hatch, shoot through it. 1 bullet inside the tank will do more than 100 outside. The German attack began on the 20th of March at 6 in the morning. 40 Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs moved across the plain, followed by 5 infantry battalions. Artillery threw columns of dust and smoke into the air. Moore waited. He ordered not to open fire until 600 meters. Ammunition economy was critical. Each belt of 110 rounds weighed about 17 kilograms. Carrying them was an additional burden, so each shot had to be measured. When the distance closed to 600 meters, 12 M2s opened fire simultaneously. The sound was devastating. Boom, 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 multiplied by 12. Tracers cut through the air in red ribbons, drawing a pattern of death. The first hit struck the tracks. A Panzer III on the left stopped, a track shredded. The second tank took a side hit. A bullet penetrated around 30 millimeters of armor and struck the ammunition stowage. An explosion tore the turret apart. The third burst into flames from a penetration of the engine compartment. Tanks tried to maneuver, but fire came from 12 points. Wherever an armored vehicle turned, there was already an M2. One tank endured hundreds of hits per minute. The armor could not hold. The infantry following behind found themselves under crossfire. 12.7 millimeter rounds destroyed bodies differently. A hit to the chest threw a man 3 meters. To a limb, tore it off completely. To the head, left only the neck. The brutality of this fire demoralized even hardened veterans. Within 30 minutes, the Germans had lost 14 tanks. The attack collapsed. The battlefield was strewn with burning machines and bodies. More calculated expenditure, about 8,800 rounds, at current prices roughly $35,000, spent to neutralize 14 tanks and 300 enemy soldiers. The effectiveness was staggering. In his report, Colonel Fritz Bayerlein, Chief of Staff of the Africa Corps, noted, "American heavy machine guns are a serious threat to our tanks. The armor of Panzer III and Panzer IV is penetrated at ranges up to 800 meters. Tactics must be changed or armor strengthened. But there was no time for fundamental changes in Africa." The campaign was drawing to a close. On the 13th of May, 1943, German and Italian forces capitulated in Tunisia. 275,000 men were taken prisoner. Among the trophies, the Allies found hundreds of documents mentioning American heavy machine guns of extraordinary effectiveness. The M2 proved its worth in the North African sands. Europe awaited it next. Italy, France, Germany. The true trials were still to come. July 1943, Operation Husky. The landing on Sicily. Patton's American 7th Army and Montgomery's British 8th Army stormed the island. Italian and German forces resisted fiercely. The mountainous terrain slowed advance, and every pillbox on a ridge became a miniature fortress. Here the M2 revealed itself in a new role, as a weapon against fortifications. The Italians built pillboxes of stone and concrete up to 1 meter thick. Ordinary machine guns left only scratches, but not the M2. Sergeant William Carter of the 45th Infantry Division received orders to suppress a pillbox that blocked the road near the town of Gela. An Italian gun in an embrasure had pinned every meter of road under fire. Artillery expended 20 shells, with no effect. Carter ordered an M2 mounted on a jeep to be brought closer. The gun was set directly opposite the embrasure at 300 meters. Carter personally took the trigger. The first round struck the concrete edge of the aperture. Stone crumbled. The second burst, 10 rounds, widened the breach. Carter acted calmly, in short bursts of 5 rounds. After 15 minutes, the concrete began to crack. 10 minutes later, the opening was the size of a football. Tracers ricocheted inside the pillbox, turning it into hell. Within 3 minutes, a white flag appeared from inside. 220 rounds, and a pillbox that had withstood artillery collapsed from a machine gun. This episode entered the U.S. Army Manual. The M2 was officially recognized as a means to fight fortifications. September 1943, the Salerno landing, now on the Italian mainland. The Germans were strongly entrenched on the heights, controlling the roads. General Clark's Fifth Army fought its way through the mountains. Here the M2 received yet another role, a mobile firing point. They began mounting it on Willys MB Jeeps, light vehicles weighing 1.1 tons, capable of reaching 105 kilometers per hour. Brackets were welded to the rear to carry the M2, and a mobile cannon on wheels was born. Lieutenant Jack Raymond commanded a platoon of 6 such jeeps, their task, reconnaissance and fire support. He developed a shoot-and-scoot tactic. Vehicles would rush onto an open position at speed, fire for 30 seconds, and vanish behind a hill or building. On the 16th of September, Raymond's platoon encountered a German column near the town of Altavilla, 15 trucks carrying infantry, 3 anti-tank guns, 2 light tanks. The Germans did not expect the strike. "Attack!" Raymond ordered. 6 jeeps burst from around the bend at full speed. 6 M2s spoke simultaneously. Tracers riddled the column with red fire. The first truck exploded. A round pierced the fuel tank. The second ignited. The third overturned. German infantry attempted to redeploy, but the machine gun barrage mowed them down in ranks. 1 jeep concentrated fire on the tanks. Rounds struck tracks, sights, and suspension. A tank stopped, blinded and disoriented. Another jeep finished it with a burst into the engine compartment. The fight lasted 3 minutes. The German column was completely destroyed. Americans suffered no losses. 1 jeep received a radiator puncture, but retreated under its own power. 1,800 rounds were expended, about $7,200 at the time, against equipment that cost hundreds of times more. Raymond's tactics spread quickly. Jeeps with the M2 became driving artillery. They patrolled roads, covered flanks, attacked convoys, and operated at night. The Germans attempted ambushes, but the speed and firepower of the M2 made them nearly untouchable. By the end of the Italian campaign in 1945, the Americans had over 5,000 jeeps equipped with M2s. They were everywhere, in every battle, in every offensive. The Italian mountains became the proving ground where the M2 demonstrated its versatility. It struck infantry, tanks, aircraft, and fortifications. There was no target this machine gun could not destroy. June 6, 1944, Normandy. The largest amphibious operation in history. 156,000 soldiers land on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. The Germans had waited for this day. For 3 years they had built the Atlantic Wall, concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, minefields, barbed wire. They were ready, but not for the M2. The first LCVPs reached Omaha at 6:30. German fire smothered the landing in a squall. MG-42s raked the ramps from bunkers. The water turned red. The first wave took horrific losses. From Company A of the 116th Regiment, only 18 out of 194 survived. But the Americans had brought their secret reinforcement. Each LCIL carried 4 M2s, and each DD Sherman had 1 mounted atop the turret. They opened fire while still in the water, 400 meters from shore. Corporal John Barnes manned an M2 on a Sherman crawling onto the sand. Around him, the hiss of bullets, mine blasts, the cries of the wounded. Straight ahead, 100 meters away, sat a bunker with an MG-42. Barnes squeezed the trigger. The M2 roared. Tracers hammered the embrasure. The first rounds chewed the concrete rim. Barnes adjusted his aim. The next burst went inside. Ricochets off the wall cut down the German crew. The MG-42 fell silent. The tank crawled forward. Barnes worked the trenches, firing points, observation posts. 12.7mm rounds sliced sandbags like paper, shredded wooden shields, and ground concrete edges to dust. By noon, the Americans had secured Omaha. Cliff height, 12 meters, beach length, 6 kilometers. The bridgehead was narrow, but it held, and the M2 played a decisive role. By the day's tally, M2s destroyed 68% of German firing points on Omaha. Then came the push into France. The Norman bocage, hedgerows up to 3 meters high, field after field, natural trenches for defense. The Germans used every green wall. Here the M2 showed its power again. Its bullet punched through hedgerows cleanly. A soldier could crouch behind a 30-centimeter trunk. The M2's round would splinter the wood and whatever lay behind it. Ordinary machine guns could not do that. The 7.92mm MG-42 bogged down in thick trunks. The M2 did not. July 1944. Operation Cobra. Breakout from Normandy. The strike on St. Lo. German positions looked impenetrable. Then General Patton proposed a radical solution. Mass the M2s. He pulled guns from 3 armies, 2,400 M2s, and placed them in a 15-kilometer line, roughly 1 machine gun every 6 meters. No one had seen such concentration of fire. Patton called it an Iron Curtain, July 25th, 11 o'clock. All 2,400 opened fire at once. The ground shakes, the air hums. 1,200,000 rounds in 1 minute, 90 tons of lead in 60 seconds. Enemy positions disappear beneath the torrent. Hedgerows rip open, trees fall, houses collapse. Germans huddle in basements, hands over ears. The sound presses like a wave. The fire lasts 15 minutes, and then silence. Not a single shot in reply. The infantry moves and meets almost no resistance. Positions swept clean. Strong points, rubble, weapons, scrap. The Iron Curtain breaks the defense in a quarter hour. This is the turning point. The Americans burst out of Normandy. The race across France begins. The Germans retreat, abandoning equipment and weapons. Patton's Third Army covers up to 60 kilometers per day. M2 armed jeeps lead the way, clearing the road. August 1944. The Falaise Pocket. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army are encircled. They try to break east, the Allies tighten the ring. M2s are sighted along every probable breakout route. On the night of August 19th to 20th, the Germans launch a desperate push. 100 tanks, 20,000 infantry. They drive straight ahead, ignoring losses. American M2s meet them with a wall of fire. The night is slashed by red tracer streams in every direction. By morning, 67 tanks and 8,000 men gone. The breakout fails, 50,000 prisoners. The Falaise Pocket becomes the grave of the German army in France. Among captured documents, an order. Avoid sectors controlled by American heavy machine guns. Break through only where they are absent. But such places had almost vanished. The M2 was everywhere. September 1944. The Americans reach the German border. Ahead lies the Siegfried Line, 630 kilometers of fortifications, thousands of bunkers, anti-tank ditches, minefields. Hitler's order, hold every meter. German doctrine relied on armored counterattacks. See a breach, throw in tanks to seal it. It had worked in 1940 against the British and French, in 1941 against the Soviets. Against Americans with the M2, it did not. October 1944. The approaches to Aachen. The 9th Panzer Division prepares a blow. 45 Panthers, the Wehrmacht's best medium tank. Frontal armor 80 millimeters, a 75 millimeter gun, speed up to 46 kilometers per hour. Opposite them, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division. The Americans knew of the attack in advance. Reconnaissance spotted the buildup. Colonel George Taylor, commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment, arrayed M2s like chess pieces. 30 guns along a 2-kilometer front, plus anti-tank guns and bazookas. At 6 a.m., the Germans drove in a wedge, fast and confident, hoping to break through before the artillery could respond. 1.5 kilometers to the lines, 3 minutes run, the M2s opened fire at 1,200 meters. The first bursts ricocheted off the frontal plate. 80 millimeters was too much for the M2, but the gunners aimed for weak points, tracks, sides, sights. The first Panther shed a track and froze. The second took a string of hits on its optics. The crew went blind. The third caught fire after a strike on the engine deck, 40 millimeter rear armor, and the M2 could defeat it out to 800 meters. The greatest effect was psychological. Inside the Panthers, the crews heard metal sleeting on armor, clang, 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 without end. The plate held, but the sound frayed nerves, and it took only a single bullet finding a seam between turret and hull by a hatch or through a sight to enter and, with ricochets, turn the compartment into a deadly trap. In 20 minutes, the Germans lost 19 tanks and fell back, leaving burning Panthers in the field. Colonel Taylor's tally, his M2s destroyed or disabled, 19 of 45. The anti-tank guns, 8. Bazookas, 6. The rest withdrew. The battle entered the manual, employment of heavy machine guns against armored targets. The document marked weak zones, Panther, tracks, rear armor, optics, sights, Tiger, sides, engine compartment, commander's cupola, Panzer for 4, side, turret, running gear. The M2 was officially recognized as an auxiliary anti-tank tool, not the primary, that was for guns, but capable of stopping or damaging a tank at ranges up to 800 meters. A unique achievement for a machine gun. November 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, the bloodiest U.S. battle in Europe. Dense thickets, narrow roads, poor visibility, a paradise for ambushes. The Germans used every tree and stone. The Americans advanced meter by meter, losing hundreds daily. Here the M2 showed something else. It worked in any weather, rain, snow, mud, from +5 to -10 degrees Celsius. Other machine guns failed. The MG-42 jammed in muck, the British Vickers froze. The M2 kept firing. The secret lay in manufacturing tolerances. Browning built in wider clearances between parts. Dirt could get inside, but would not seize the mechanism. Water drained through ports. Snow melted on the hot barrel. The result was the same. The gun ran. Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the 4th Infantry Division fought the entire battle with his M2. 42 days of continuous combat. The gun worked daily, sometimes for hours at a time. O'Brien swapped barrels every 500 rounds. Overheating is the enemy of accuracy. In total, he fired 47,000 rounds. Not a single failure, not a single stoppage. When the battle ended, the worn M2 went to the rear. Armorers inspected it. Barrel, to be replaced, the rifling was eaten. Bolt, merely scuffed, the rest, serviceable. The gun could have kept going. Thus the legend was born, an M2 that went through Hürtgen without a breakdown. Stars and Stripes ran a photo of O'Brien with his gun. Caption, the most reliable weapon of the war. December 1944. Hitler launches his last great operation in the West. Watch on the Rhine, a breakthrough across the Ardennes, seizure of Antwerp, division of the Allies. The strike group, 250,000 soldiers, 1,400 tanks, 1,900 guns. The largest concentration of force since 1940. December the 16th, 5:30. 2 hours of artillery preparation pound American positions. Then the tanks roll. Tiger II, Panthers, Panzerwaffes, with infantry behind. Columns hide in snow fog. The Americans were not expecting it. Units were resting after heavy fighting. Many were green. The 106th Infantry Division had been on the line only 2 weeks. Little experience. But they had M2s. Bastogne became a symbol of resistance. December 20th, the Germans encircled the town. Inside, the 101st Airborne under Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, 11,000 against 45,000. To the ultimatum, surrender or be destroyed, McAuliffe answered with one word, nuts. Assaults began from every side, tanks, infantry, artillery. The Americans held. In every sector, M2s worked day and night. Artillery shells and rifle cartridges dwindled, but 50 BMG came in by air. Lieutenant Robert Boley defended the northern outskirts of Bastogne, 2 tripod-mounted M2s and 1 on a jeep. Over 24 hours, his sector faced 6 attacks, each with tanks. First attack, December 21st, 6 o'clock. 5 Panzerwaffes and a company of infantry. Boley opened fire at 900 meters on the tracks. The first tank stopped. The second, trying to pass, took a side hit and burned. The others pulled back. Second attack, 10 o'clock. 8 tanks. Boley held fire until 400 meters and hit the vision blocks. Crews went blind, vehicles tangled, 1 tank rammed another, 2 flipped into a ditch. Another retreat. Thus the day passed. All 6 attacks repelled. Expenditure, 8,200 rounds. Barrels changed 4 times. They ran so hot, the snow melted in a circle. Assistance poured on water, steam in a pillar, but the fire did not stop. On December 26th, Patton's Third Army lifted the siege. Bastogne held. The Germans lost 800 tanks and 70,000 soldiers there. The Americans, 19,000. Among the captured orders, bypass positions with heavy machine guns, attack only after artillery preparation or at night. The loudest Ardennes episode, Corporal Austin Schembert's fight near the village of Schönborn, December 23rd. Schembert and his assistant held a position with a single M2 against a battalion, 600 men and 4 tanks. He had 550 rounds. The columns closed along the road. 400 meters, 300, 200. Schembert opened fire. The first burst hit the head of the column. It stalled. The second ripped the tracks of the lead tank. The vehicle froze. The road was narrow, nowhere to turn. Panic began. The gunner worked methodically. 5 shots, 2-second pause, 5 more. He conserved ammo, but kept the tempo. In 15 minutes, he expended all 550. Result, 173 enemy dead and 89 wounded, 2 tanks halted. The battalion withdrew. Schembert received the Silver Star. Exceptional bravery and mastery in the employment of his weapon. By his actions, he halted the advance of an enemy battalion. The Ardennes offensive ultimately failed. By the end of January 1945, the Germans had fallen back to their start lines. 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft, and 100,000 soldiers lost. Reserves exhausted. Only collapse lay ahead. The M2 proved its value again. In the hardest battle, in the worst weather, it ran. Inspector of Armored Troops, General Heinz Guderian recorded in his report, "American equipment surpasses ours. Especially impressive are the heavy machine guns, effective against everything from infantry to tanks. We have no analog. The MG-42 was faster, the MG-34 lighter, but the M2 was more powerful, and power decides battles." February 1945. The Allies reach the Rhine, the last great water barrier on the road into Germany. Bridges are blown, ferries sunk, machine guns firing from every house. But the front is unraveling. No reserves, new tanks cannot leave the lines fast enough. The ranks filled with the old and with boys. The M2 becomes not only a weapon, but a symbol of superiority. Seeing the silhouette of the gun on a jeep or a tank, German soldiers surrender more readily. Resistance is pointless. The M2 will break any attempt. March 1945, Remagen. The Americans seize the bridge unexpectedly. The demolition fails. It is a chance to build a bridgehead, and the Germans throw in everything, tanks, infantry, even Me-262s, to destroy it. On and around the bridge, 30 M2s. They cover anything that moves. Jet fighters dive. The machine guns meet them with dense fire. The Me-2. 62 is fast, up to 870 kilometers per hour, but the M2s work in mass. 3 are shot down, 2 crash damage nearby. Tanks trying to reach the bridge are stopped as well. The approaches are swept at 600 to 800 meters, the range where the M2 is especially dangerous. German armor quality is already limping, a shortage of alloying elements, and .50 BMG rounds bite more easily. In 10 days, 100,000 soldiers and 20,000 vehicles cross at Remagen. Trying to break the crossing, the Germans lose 47 tanks and 3,000 men. Credited to the M2, 31 tanks destroyed or disabled, a record for a machine gun. April 1945. The advance from every side, Americans from the west, British from the north, French from the south, Soviets from the east. Resistance thins daily. The M2 fires less often, but fanatics, SS and Hitlerjugend still fight on. And then the gun becomes the key again. Dessau, April 21st. A group of about 120 SS men, covered by 3 Tiger II, tries to break east, better to surrender to the Russians. An American outpost, 8 soldiers and 1 M2. The commander, Sergeant Thomas Miller. In front of him, 70-ton Kings with a 180mm nose and an 88mm gun. Miller knows, frontally, useless. He needs the tracks. He waits until 300 meters and sends 10 aimed rounds into the left track of the first Tiger. 2 penetrations. The track snaps. The machine stops. The second tries to swing around, takes a string into the right track and also halts. The third turns to withdraw. Miller shifts fire to the engine deck. Rear armor 80mm on the edge of the M2's capability. 50 shots, 3 get through, the tank catches fire. The SS drop their weapons. They cannot believe their eyes. A machine gun stopped 3 Tiger II. But the fact burns before them. This is one of the M2's last fights in Europe. On May 8, 1945, Germany capitulates. The war ends. The M2 has traveled from the sands of North Africa to the heart of the Third Reich, from the first fights in Tunisia to the final ones near Dessau. It worked every time. Tallies record the M2 destroyed or damaged 2,847 German tanks during the war. Astonishing for a machine gun. Plus, thousands of firing points, hundreds of aircraft, tens of thousands of soldiers. The M2 became the most versatile weapon in the American arsenal. German documents, orders, instructions, reports repeatedly mention the American 12.7mm machine cannon and advise avoiding it. But avoidance was impossible. The M2 was everywhere. While Europe burned, another war raged thousands of kilometers away. The Pacific, hundreds of islands, the Japanese Empire. Here the M2 faced a different enemy, different tactics, and uncompromising fanaticism. The Japanese did not surrender. The Code of Bushido forbade capitulation. Better death than the shame of capture. They fought to the last cartridge, then to the last grenade, and then knives and bare hands. That fanaticism was terrifying, but the M2 feared only breakdowns. And there were none. February 1945, Iwo Jima. 8 square kilometers of volcanic sand turned into a fortress. 18,000 defenders, about 1,500 pillboxes, kilometers of underground tunnels. The island controlled an airfield. From it, B-29s could reach Japan. On February 19th, the landing began. Marines stepped onto black beaches. The Japanese let the first waves dig in, then opened a hurricane of fire, machine guns, mortars. Men fell by the dozens, the sand darkened with blood. But with the Marines came the M2s, on Amtraks, on jeeps, and when vehicles bogged, in pieces on men's backs. Heavy, 38 kilograms, but essential. Corporal Robert Leader of the 4th Division emplaced his M2 20 meters from the water. Bullets hissed, sand leapt from impacts, but he methodically assembled the trigger group, set the barrel, and fed the belt. In 2 minutes, the gun was alive. Ahead, 80 meters away, a pillbox. A Type 92 hammered non-stop from within. Leader took aim and fired a burst. The M2 roared. In the battle's thunder, its voice was lost, but the tracers drilled the embrasure. Iwo's bunkers were special, concrete up to a meter thick, rail bar reinforcement from stripped ships, embrasures under steel plates. Ordinary machine guns could not break such works. The M2 could. The first rounds knocked the plate free. It toppled, exposing a slit. The next burst poured inside, and the pillbox went silent. Leader shifted to the neighboring point. Same method, plate first, then inside fire. Another crew went quiet. By nightfall, the Marines had advanced 300 meters. After dark, the Japanese counterattacked. Waves of 100 to 200 men, with cries of "Banzai!" with swords and rifles. The Americans met them with M2 fire. Sergeant John Basilone held a position with 2 M2s. A veteran of Guadalcanal and Bougainville, he knew night assaults, frontal and to the last. At 2 a.m., another wave rose from the dark at 50 meters. Basilone opened fire. Tracers sliced the night. The first rank fell, the second climbed over the dead. Basilone worked methodically. When the first M2 overheated, he shifted to the second, firing 10-round bursts, conserving ammunition without sacrificing accuracy. Each burst, 3 to 4 attackers down. The assault lasted an hour. Expenditure, 2,200 rounds. At dawn, they counted 187 bodies before the position. Basilone received the Medal of Honor, America's highest award. Days later, he was killed by a mortar round. The war spared no one. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days, the bloodiest for the Marine Corps. 6,800 killed, 20,000 wounded. Japanese losses, essentially all 18,000. Only 216 surrendered, mostly unconscious and gravely wounded. The M2's role was decisive. Of 800 M2s on the island, 623 survived to the end. 77% reliability amid sand, salt, and humidity. Under the same conditions, the Japanese Type 92 managed about 34%. April 1945. Okinawa, the last bastion before Japan. 110,000 defenders and the campaign's strongest defenses. The battle lasted 82 days, the longest island operation. Here the M2 met a new threat, kamikaze. Suicide planes packed with explosives attacked ships. One hit often proved fatal. Around Okinawa, the Japanese sent roughly 1,900 kamikaze. American ships were saturated with M2s, on a destroyer, 6, on a cruiser, 12, on a carrier, 24. The guns wove walls of fire. A .50 BMG strike punched through an aircraft's skin, a hit to the engine, a fall to the tank, an explosion to the pilot, loss of control. The destroyer USS Laffey, April 16th, fought off 22 attacks in 80 minutes. 6 M2s ran without pause. 19 planes shot down, 3 broke through and struck the ship. The Laffey survived, heavily damaged. 5 of 6 M2s remained in action even after impacts. Over the Okinawa operation, shipboard M2s downed 781 Japanese aircraft. For a weapon designed for ground targets, a phenomenal result. The M2 became the most effective naval anti-aircraft machine gun of the war. August 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, surrender on August 15th. The war ends. The M2 had fought through every Pacific campaign, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, in the jungles of the Solomons, on the sands of Tarawa, in the ash of Iwo Jima, and it worked every time. 5 years of quiet. The M2 lay in depots under preservative grease. The U.S. Army shrank from 12 million to 600,000. Production nearly stopped. It seemed the age of great wars was over. The nuclear era had changed the rules. Why machine guns? June 25, 1950. North Korea invaded the South. 90,000 soldiers, 150 T-3485s, 700 guns. Seoul fell within a week. The United States intervened, the United Nations endorsed. The Korean War began. The first American units arrived in July. The 24th Infantry Division, 7,000 men, poorly prepared, few with combat experience. Armament, M1 Garand, a handful of bazookas, 30 M2s. Opposite them, veterans who had fought the Japanese in 1945 and then in the Chinese Civil War. July 29th, the Daejeon sector. Captain James Clark's company holds a bridge. North Koreans advance with tanks, 5 T-3485s, frontal armor 90mm and 85mm gun, one of the best medium tanks of the Second World War. Clark has 2 M2s. From European reports he knows. Frontally, useless, hit sides, rear, tracks. His order, open fire at 500 meters. The M2 spoke. The first tracers sparked off the glacis. The T-34 kept coming. Correction. Aim for the tracks. The first tank throws a track and stops. The second takes a burst to the side, 45 millimeters of armor. A .50 bullet passes through, clips the ammunition, the turret jumps. The rest pivot and run. A T-34 disabled by a machine gun, an unexpected effect. Soviet instructors had told the North Koreans, American machine guns cannot harm a T-34. They were wrong, but the true trial was winter. Korean cold, down to minus 35 degrees Celsius. Wind from Manchuria up to 60 kilometers per hour. Oils petrify, metal turns brittle, soldiers' fingers frostbite. November 1950. The Chosin Reservoir. 30,000 Marines find themselves encircled by 120,000 Chinese volunteers. The Chinese attack in waves, hundreds of fighters indifferent to death. The Americans are short of ammunition. The situation is critical. The M2s run non-stop. But the cold exacts a price. Lubricant in the bolt freezes, belts stiffen. Soldiers improvise. Sergeant Robert Simmons douses his M2 with gasoline. It does not congeal at minus 35, dissolves the grease, flushes the mechanism. The gun comes alive. Others adopt the method. Within days, half the M2s in the pocket are running on gasoline. The Chinese attack at night. Horns, drums, shouting, psychological pressure. Then, dense chains. The first wave falls, the second treads over bodies, the third the same. The fourth reaches the foxholes, hand to hand. The M2 is the only weapon that slices the waves. It fires until the barrel glows. At minus 35, the hot steel hisses, melting snow. Men throw snow on the barrel to cool it, and fight on. Lieutenant Joseph Owen holds a position with 3 M2s. Through the night, his platoon repels 7 assaults, expends 12,000 rounds. In front of the position, they count 340 bodies. Dead, 3, wounded, 5. The line holds. After 12 days, the Americans break the ring. Of 30,000, 25,000 get out. In order, with vehicles and weapons. Losses, 5,000 killed and wounded. The Chinese leave 60,000. Their waves shatter on the fire. The M2 becomes the emblem of that endurance. American analysts study Chosin. The M2 needs adaptation to extreme cold. They develop special lubricants, working down to minus 50 degrees Celsius, change barrel alloys, add chromium for cold resistance. By 1951, all M2s in Korea are updated. The war continues until 1953. The M2 serves at every stage, from the retreat of 1950 to the counter-offensive of 1951, from positional battles in 1952 to the armistice in 1953. To its credit, roughly 1,200 North Korean and Chinese tanks and armored vehicles, 83 downed aircraft, and tens of thousands of shattered assault groups. Korea proved it. The M2 remains relevant, even in the age of jet fighters and nuclear weapons. Against Soviet-built tanks and Chinese human waves, it worked again, as always. 1965. The United States enters the war in Vietnam. A different war, a different enemy. Not regular divisions, but guerrillas. Not open terrain, but jungle. Not frontal assaults, but ambushes. The M2 had to prove its worth again. The Viet Cong avoided open battles, strike, then slip into the thickets, blast a convoy, then flee into tunnels. Classic insurgency. It was hard to bring massed firepower to bear. You could not see the targets. The answer came from the air. Helicopters. The UH-1 Huey, the war's workhorse. M2s were mounted in the doors. A door gunner stood on the skid, holding the gun on an elastic sling, combing the canopy while flying low. Specialist 4th Class Gary Wetmore was a door gunner. His Huey flew close air support for infantry, altitude about 50 meters, speed 160 kilometers per hour, hunting Viet Cong from above. On July 14, 1967, a platoon was ambushed near the Mekong. Fire from 3 directions, the soldiers pinned to the ground. The call went out. Wetmore's Huey arrived in 8 minutes. Wetmore spotted muzzle flashes in the green wall and opened fire at a 45-degree angle down. .50 BMG rounds shredded leaves, branches, and brush, and reached the ground. Those hiding behind trunks were not protected. The M2 chewed through wood. Those in pits were hit by ricochets from above. In 10 minutes, 800 rounds. Enemy fire faded. The platoon pulled back without losses. On the ground lay 23 dead Viet Cong with the unmistakable wounds of the M2. Helicopter-borne M2s became a nightmare for the Viet Cong. From below, it was hard to hit a helicopter. From above, the gunner could see everything. Movement in the undergrowth, a shadow, a flash. Even greater effect came from attack machines. The AH-1 Cobra, the first dedicated attack helicopter, narrow fuselage, 280 kilometers per hour, 2 M2s in the nose plus rockets. The Cobra hunted columns. Captain Robert Jackson flew Cobras in 1969. His principle, low, fast, sudden. Pop up, strike, vanish. On March 23rd, Jackson spotted a column, about 80 fighters and 3 trucks with weapons on a forest road, walking loosely. He attacked from the rear. The Cobra skimmed 5 meters above the ground. The M2s raked the column from behind. The first truck exploded, ammunition in the bed. The second ignited. The Viet Cong scattered into the brush. But Jackson turned and made a second pass. 2 runs, 1,400 rounds, 2 rockets. The column was destroyed. He returned to base with 3 AK-47 holes in the tail. The Cobra held. Over a year, Jackson flew 247 combat sorties. His M2s fired over 180,000 rounds. No serious failures. Only routine barrel changes every 10,000. Vietnam also showed the M2's limits. Against the T-54 with a 100mm glacis and 80mm sides, the machine gun was powerless. TOW anti-tank missiles were needed. But against BTR-50, light PT-76, and the myriad of unarmored targets, the M2 remained ideal. It was mounted on jeeps, tanks, helicopters, riverine boats, and APCs. It was everywhere. The war ended in 1975 with an American defeat, but the M2 acquitted itself well. More than 800,000 M2s cycled through Vietnam. Total expenditure, 1.5 billion rounds, about 63,000 tons of lead. Laid nose to tail, those bullets would circle the equator 3 times. After Vietnam, the M2 should have aged out. The MG3, FN MAG, and PKM appeared, lighter, faster, more modern. Analysts argued for replacement and launched new programs. Yet the M2 stayed, the 1980s, the Cold War, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. The U.S. Army prepared for a great battle in Europe, Soviet armored wedges against Western kit. In those plans, the M2 had its place. It went on everything, M1 Abrams, and M2 by the commander's hatch, M2 Bradley, and M2 up top, M113, and M2 on the cupola, Humvee, the heirs of the Willies, also with the M2. Production continued. The plant in Oak Park, Illinois, turned out about 50 units per day. By 1990, over 3 million had been built. The most produced heavy machine gun in history. 1991, Desert Storm. The coalition versus Saddam's army. The Iraqis had 5,500 tanks, including T-72s. The M2 met armor once more. February 26th. Lieutenant David Zeitler's Abrams encountered 4 T-72s at 2,000 meters. He killed 2 with the 120mm gun. The others maneuvered. The commander, Sergeant Chris Mentor, opened with the M2 at 1,800 meters, not to penetrate, but to blind. Sights, antennas, external fittings. A blind T-72 was an easy mark for the next main gun shot. The tactic spread through units. The M2's job against tanks was not kill, but rob them of eyes and ears. Over the campaign, M2s degraded 200+ Iraqi vehicles this way. Most work was against soft targets, trucks, pickups, gun positions. In 100 hours of the ground offensive, the M2 destroyed over 2,000 Iraqi vehicles, finishing columns on the highway of death between Kuwait and Iraq. Photographs circled the world. Hundreds of burned-out hulks and black silhouettes. The M2 did its job. 12.7mm bullets tearing engines, tanks, and cabs. 2001, Afghanistan. Mountains, caves, the Taliban. The M2 was needed again. On pickups, on base towers, on helicopters. fire into cave mouths, rocks spalled, passages collapsed. 2003, Iraq, cities, barricades, ambushes. The M2 on Humvees led convoys, knocked out sniper nests, crushed resistance points, and cleared streets. The 2010s brought modernization, electronic sights, laser rangefinders, night optics, a lightened receiver set, cutting the gun from 38 to 32 kilograms, and a true quick-change barrel. Browning's core remained. 2020. The M2 was in service with 57 countries, from the United States to Thailand, from Brazil to Finland. Total built, over 3.5 million. The design's age, 87 years. No other machine gun has served so long. Why? The answer is simple. The M2 does the work, always. In any weather, against anyone. It is not the lightest or the fastest, but it is the most reliable and most powerful. A 12.7mm bullet fired in 1933 carries the same energy as in 2025. Physics has not changed. 18,000 joules are 18,000 joules. They pierce armor, rip engines, and smash targets. Then and now. Engineers have sought replacements many times. New guns, new cartridges, new systems, millions of dollars, yet no project surpassed the M2. It remained the benchmark. In 2015, the U.S. Army officially stated the M2 will remain in service at least until 2050. That is 117 years for a single design, longer than the lifespan of 4 generations. A phenomenon of engineering thought. Today, the M2 stands on the border with Russia and Poland, on bases in Japan facing China, in Syria's deserts against ISIS, on ships in the Persian Gulf, at airfields around the world. It waits, ready to fire. As always, 92 years of service, 7 major wars, dozens of local conflicts, from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of Vietnam, from Korea's freeze to Iraq's heat. The M2 Browning marched through all of the 20th century and into the 21st, a weapon that outlived empires, ideologies, and technical revolutions. The Germans felt its strength first, makers of the war's fastest machine gun, the MG-42, and of the Tiger and Panther tanks. They were stunned by how the M2 mowed down attacks before they reached the line, snapped tracks and mangled armor, struck infantry, and, most of all, shattered confidence. The M2's secret was not cleverness, but simplicity. John Moses Browning understood perfectly. Reliability matters more than frills. He designed a machine gun with a minimum of moving parts and wide tolerances so it would run in mud and sand. He paired it with a powerful cartridge that forgave small aiming errors. Energy did the rest. 75 parts, not 300, as in fussy systems. Not 500, as in precision experiments. Every part in its place, none superfluous, none weak. The philosophy was plain. Build a thing that always works. And the M2 did work. At minus 35 degrees Celsius in Korea, as other guns froze. At plus 50 in Iraq, when metal seemed to flow from heat. In Vietnam's dripping jungles where rust eats steel. In Afghanistan's sandstorms where abrasive grit chokes mechanisms. It fired, constantly. 3.5 million M2s built. Imagine, if all of them thundered at once, the echo would seem to ring to the moon. If all their bullets flew one way, they would form a sheet of metal a kilometer wide and 10 meters high, a scale hard to grasp. But behind the figures stand people, hundreds of thousands of gunners behind M2s, Sergeant Hendricks in Tunisia, Corporal Barnes on Omaha, Lieutenant Bowley at Bastogne. They felt the bolt's vibration, heard the roar, watched red tracer rails, and knew the M2 would not fail. For many, it marked the line between life and death. When tanks drove on Bastogne, the M2 stopped them. When banzai charges rolled on Iwo Jima, the M2 cut the waves. When the Chinese tightened the ring at Chosin, the M2 held the perimeter. Soldiers trusted this weapon more than any other because it did not betray them. Opponents admitted as much. German orders: bypass positions with heavy machine guns. Japanese instructions: avoid American heavy machine guns. Viet Cong reports: helicopters with M2, priority targets. An enemy's recognition can weigh more than medals. Today the M2 serves a third generation, A grandfather fired it in Germany in 1945, a father in Vietnam in 1968, a grandson in Afghanistan in 2010. The same silhouette, the same mechanism, the same principles. 3 generations, 1 weapon. Technology has changed utterly. In 1933, there were no radars or computers, no jets. The fastest fighter barely reached 400 kilometers per hour. Bombs weighed tons. Tank armor measured 30 millimeters. Today, fighters are supersonic. Bombs are satellite-guided. Tanks wear composite armor. The world is different, but the M2 remains because its task is unchanged: to fire, to hit, to destroy. There is symbolism here. A weapon born in the Great Depression, when America was on its knees, proven in a world war where democracy fought fascism, surviving the nuclear balance of the Cold War, battling terror where the enemy wears no uniform and bears no flag. Through every era, the M2 stayed a constant, unchanging and reliable, no grand promises. It simply worked, day by day, fight by fight, war by war. Perhaps that is the lesson. The newest is not always needed. The most complex is not always best. Often simplicity and strength beat sophistication. Sometimes genius lies not in adding parts, but in subtracting the unnecessary. Browning died in 1926. He never saw the Second World War, knew nothing of Korea, Vietnam, or Iraq, and could not imagine his creation would live nearly a century. But he did his job perfectly. He built a weapon that outlived time. When an M2 speaks today on a border, in a desert, or in the mountains, it echoes that day in 1933 when the first prototype passed its trials. The same voice, the same force, the same effectiveness. 92 years, and nothing essential has changed. That is not a weakness, it is a triumph. Perhaps in half a century, armies will field lasers, railguns, and plasma systems. Perhaps the M2 will sit in museums and soldiers will marvel that their great-grandfathers fought with such a primitive thing. But for now, it stands on watch, loaded, ready, waiting for the next call. Wars have not vanished. Conflicts go on. Somewhere, a soldier's hands rest on the butterfly trigger, peering into the dark. When the enemy comes, the M2 will speak, in the same voice heard in Normandy, on Iwo Jima before Bastogne. The voice of power and certainty, the voice of a weapon that never betrayed those who held it. Can a single machine gun stop an army? History says no, but it also says something else. A single gun can change a battle, save a platoon, break an assault, buy time for a counterstrike. The M2 Browning did it again and again. It never won a war alone, but it helped win them all. A modest hero, an iron soldier that knew neither fatigue, nor fear, nor doubt. And when, in a distant future, the last M2 fires the last round, the world will pause for a heartbeat. An era will end, the age of a weapon that served longer than any other and became a legend in the lifetime of its creator. But that day is not yet. The era continues, and the M2 keeps firing,